is Trish, and welcome to Teacher Therapy. Today we have a very special guest named Mr. Rufaeel, and he is going to talk to us about his experience teaching in England. He has taught all over the world, but unfortunately teaching in the UK was an awful experience, and he's going to tell us all about it. But before we get there, I would just love to have you tell us, what are some of the other countries that you taught in?
Thank you. So I've taught in Australia, New Zealand, the United Arab Emirates, and the UK. And again, like you said, I had a lot of great experiences in a lot of them, but England was definitely different. A lot of challenges there that don't exist outside of England.
Oh, that is so interesting to hear, because I know that in America, a lot of us have the perception that British kids are really polite and cultured and sweet. And we're just picturing a movie where they're like, here's your apple, sir. So is it like that, or what are we missing over here about the picture of behavior with these kiddos?
Well, a lot of the time I'll say that the most unrealistic part of Harry Potter isn't the monsters. It's that classrooms can be full of English kids and not be utter chaos. That's the most unrealistic part of the film. But the basically the classrooms in England are chaos most of the time. There is just constant misbehavior. I would say the most prominent is dishonesty. So I made a video series that I can discuss later, but in that I kind of broke down my life in days. I've been alive for around 11,000 days, but of that about 300 were in public schools in England. And yet I would say 99% of the lies told to me were in those 300 days teaching in England. Like every lesson. Sometimes I used to do the register and I'd say like, Justin, and the kid would say, oh, well, I didn't do it. I wasn't me. Oh, here, sir. Like, it's just constant lying. And it was just a relentless amount of misbehavior. And it was like nothing I've ever seen. I was completely unprepared for it.
Oh, so walk us through a day in the life of Mr. Rufaeel in an English classroom. Was it like you're trying to give lessons and kids are throwing things, or what are some of the basic misbehaviors that you would see on a day-to-day basis?
All right. So more often than not, my day would begin with a meeting. So we had 4 meetings a week, and these meetings were they were pretty heavy as well. They'd introduce new policies and strategies. As the meeting's going on, the kids would start to sort of congregate outside the classroom, and immediately you can hear them having arguments with each other. If it isn't nailed down, they'll try to move it around. So I once used we used to use door stops to keep the door open, and they'd steal the door stops. Or then I'd have to use a fire extinguisher, and I'd hear some metal, I'd look up, and the fire extinguisher's gone. It's moved in the middle of the hall. So even before they've entered the classroom, there is misbehavior. It's just all the time. Once the students are in the classroom, a lot of the time what they'll do is they'll push each other. I've seen kicking quite often. Maybe every 3 lessons, I'll have a kid kick a kid as they're walking into the classroom. And in England, you're supposed to lay the books out in the front. So I'm not sure what they do in America, but in England, you have to keep your books in the classroom. And do they do that in the US?
No.
Well, all your books. So I had about 14 classes, 30 kids in each. So I had 400 textbooks in the classroom. And you'd have to lay them out for the kids. And basically, almost every other lesson, a kid would take the book and hit another kid with it. So before it started, we're talking a minute into the lesson. And you've already got fights, you've already got disagreements, arguments, swearing was quite common. And what was quite strange, which I never saw in any other country, was almost every other lesson you'd have a student just basically have some kind of issue where they couldn't enter the classroom. Like, I drank a fizzy drink and now I've got too much energy, so I have to stay out of class. And that teacher said I can do that. And it's just relentless. You can't organize the class, you can't manage them, and the class hasn't even started yet. It gets, and I think one of the worst ones is probably pen related issues. So you start the lesson, you say, does everyone have a pen? And maybe 10 kids don't have a pen. You give them the pen, give it a 5 minutes, there's 3 pens exploded or 3 pens broke. So then you have to give pens all the time. And then they're constantly destroying the equipment and they don't want to learn. And they just they're always like this, every time in the lesson. And it's almost impossible. There's so many obstacles the students put in place. And again, big one is you also get observed a lot. So teachers will come in, senior leadership will walk in and observe and then leave, and you'll get some passive aggressive email. But yeah, it's unlike any experience I've had.
Wow. And so would you find that kids would argue back with you, or ever kind of attack you, as in calling names or threatening? Or is it more passive aggressive, annoying behavior that happens all day?
Both. Both. So always argumentative and dismissive, without a doubt. I've done seating plans in 4 countries, and they've never gone down like they do in England. In England, you ask, Jimmy, could you sit here? Instantly, there's a problem. I don't want to sit there. Why do you always make me go first? I'm always at the front. And there's just a constant argument immediately. And a lot of the time, there is there is that physical aspect, but they're not more often it's directed towards each other, not towards me. But I have been on the receiving end where kids have thrown things at me. I've had spitballs at me. I've had students threatening to beat me up, get their dads to beat me up. And it's just really aggressive and really unpleasant behavior.
Wow. And so you said that in the other countries you taught, you did not experience this behavior. So kind of contrast that, just like walk us through, and what are the worst problems you would have when you taught in other countries?
Sure. So other countries are not like this at all. I like to give an example with when I saw the pens example. So they used to give us boxes for pens in England when the kids would miss a pen or break a pen or lose it. I went through 5 boxes of 50 pens. So 250 pens in 1 year. But in New Zealand, at the start of the year, my head of department gave me 3 pens and said, if a kid needs a pen, give them one. I've still got those pens. like it's just a completely other world. Like, for instance, other countries like the United Arab Emirates, language barrier was a huge part, which is understandable. They all speak Arabic or Hindi. And I speak Arabic as well, but the school's policy was we want these kids to speak English, so don't speak to them in Arabic. But that's the kind of issues you have there, issues that are overcome with strategies that actually work. But there's no real strategies that works with this. Where you give them a pen, they'll throw it out the window sometimes in England. But it's, I think in Australia, a lot of the time the issues were if there was a fight between 2 students, they would just be silent in the class. So it was manageable, they'd be silent. But in England, they would continue to fight in the class. Like there's no disregard for authority, no disregard for the flow of a lesson. They wouldn't regard their education at all. They would ruin a lesson if they're in a bad mood. And yeah, I mean, it's real. I would say that in my first day teaching in England, I kicked more kids out than the last 3 years outside of England put together. So yeah.
That's really shocking. And so I'm wondering and assuming that there might be a tie-in with parenting. And so when you would try to communicate this information to parents, what was your experience like in England?
Thankfully, it's more 50-50. If it was dealing with students, it's like 90 to 95% of the time, they're going to be aggressive and escalate the situation and negative. But with the parents, thankfully, it was 50-50. So I'd call a parent home or I'd send an email. Half the time, they'd be supportive and they'd relay the information to the child. The other half, they would accuse a teacher of negligence. They would say that my child said he didn't do that, so you're falsely targeting my child, you're accusing him of this, and so forth. And a huge part of this is the SEN department, so special educational needs. They will diagnose a lot of these students with ADHD, anxiety, oppositional defiance disorder, and they'll create a pupil passport which has a list of strategies. And the parents have a copy of this. So what happens is if you get a complaint from a teacher, the parent knows everything on that list. Did you do that? Did you do this? If they find one thing that hasn't happened, did you give them 5 minutes outside first? Did you let them get a drink of water? If you didn't do that, instantly you're negligent. And then they go to your higher ups. So almost every email I got where it was the other half that were quite aggressive, it was CCing my head of department, CCing the principal, CCing the deputies. And they were always trying to escalate and escalate and escalate. But I'm grateful for the positive 50%. At least I had that.
Wow, it's unbelievable how much this sounds like teaching in America. That is just astounding. And so you're having a big teacher shortage in England, just like we are over here. Did you find that like your teacher coworkers were feeling demoralized and beaten down, or have they more accepted this is just the culture, this is the students, because they're more used to it? How did that work?
I would say that the teacher shortage, it's kind of strange. It's almost like the teachers have Stockholm syndrome in a sense, where like you'll hear teachers talking about the horrible behavior, like the foul, the worst swear words you've heard, the destruction of property, all of that. And they say, there's a teacher shortage, and they'll only mention the salary. If only we got paid more, everything would be. They've never they almost like convince themselves to ignore the bad behavior, ignore the abuse from parents, ignore all of that. So I think it's more like a Stockholm syndrome thing. You talk to teachers about it, and you never really get effective and satisfying answers from them because it's like they've been around it. This is the way it is. And I think for me, it's so obvious because I'm coming from different cultures, I'm coming from different backgrounds, and it's just blaring. I can't believe that happened. Because that always happens. Yeah, but that's the first time I've seen it. So it's, for me, it's much, much more vivid. And I've almost felt like it's talking to people on deaf ears. It's falling on deaf ears a lot of the time because they don't see what I'm seeing because they're in it. They were raised in it. They were probably like that when they were students. And It's not really that fruitful trying to talk to other teachers unless they're from other countries as well.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think just as a whole, there's so much gaslighting in the teaching profession. And so I totally agree. I think teachers even internalize that voice and just say, oh, it must be me. I need to have better strategies. I need to work harder. What could I have done in this situation? And that's why I'm so thankful to have interviews with people like you that can kind of help people to see that what they're noticing isn't in their imagination and it's happening everywhere. And so you guys have something called OFSTED that I find kind of interesting. Can you explain that to teachers that have never heard of that, what that's like and what the pressure is like?
Sure. So OFSTED basically is a watchdog group. Their job is to observe schools, and they claim that their job is to the goal, is to maintain educational standards. But the problem is there's no positives about them when you examine them. So I've examined them at length in a video series, and there's nothing positive about them. So what they do is they go send an inspector to a school, and the inspector will rank the school from 1 to 4. 1 is the best, outstanding, then good, then needs improvement, then inadequate. And if a school fails this inspection, they basically get bid in something called academization. And if that happens, the head teacher is most likely going to lose his job or her job. The SLT members are going to get fired, and everything's going to get changed. So it's not only going to ruin your career, it's going to ruin your career, reputation. So schools are petrified of OFSTED. So to avoid that fate and to really kind of go for that one goal, what they'll do is they'll anything and everything to appease OFSTED. So if OFSTED says, we want to see this, every school is suddenly focusing on that one topic. And there are so many examples of that. For example, attendance. So you can kind of predict it as well. If you know what Ofsted's looking for, you know what schools are going to do next. So what happens is Ofsted says that we want to focus on attendance. So they release this blog and say that schools that can show that they're doing everything they can to focus on attendance will be viewed as favorable. Around that same time, all the schools, and especially my school, I saw this as well, they had basically assemblies on attendance, basically hammering down. They were yelling at all whole year groups, you have to be on attendance. Attendance is the most important thing. They had PA announcements. There's 5 minutes left. You have to go do attendance. We had meetings beforehand. We had workshops. You have to stand at the threshold. If you see a kid walking, tell them to walk faster. You have to go at the same time. And all that out of pure fear of upsetting Ofsted. So my job in teaching in England wasn't I'm a geography teacher. It wasn't teaching geography. It was just impressing Ofsted. And it took me a while to figure out that's what I was actually doing. But that is the whole objective. If you get, like in my video series in the last part, I give a hypothetical question, a choice. Suppose you've got two teachers. One is the best teacher in the world, and the other one, or the best teacher in the world, and this person is perfect subject knowledge. Everyone understands his content. He is the best of the best, but pragmatic. So basically disregards the Ofsted marking because he thinks, it's not important. He doesn't follow its rules because he's got a goal. The other person does just enough not to get fired. So he basically just does that just enough, but he's bored. So he does everything that is required by Ofsted, which is marking most of them more often than not. They expect you to do tremendous amounts of marking. So this teacher that is really good does everything, the other one does nothing. And you ask the teachers, who would you fire? The best teacher in the world that Ofsted would disapprove of because he doesn't do the marking, or a lazy teacher that does excellent marking. And you find that most teachers will fire the best teacher in the world because they're terrified of Ofsted. So everything about them really is just, how do you praise Ofsted? It's almost like they worship Ofsted.
Wow. And so when you say marking, does that mean like grading and kind of like what is marking?
Okay, marking is spelling, grammar, punctuation, basically checking for understanding. So you have to read every kid's notes, not tests and assignments, not exams, notes they're taking. So you ask a question on the board and they write it down. You have to read that and you have to basically tick it and mark it and say, oh, that's good. Underline the words. They want you underlining a squiggly line if it's misspelling, and then you write the correct spelling for them down. You also have to basically write down any scribbling. When kids scribble, even we scribble as adults, so scribble on there like little butterflies here. So you're supposed to correct that and say, do not put this, it makes your book unneat. Unneat to who? To the student? No, to the Ofsted inspector. So it's all to impress Ofsted. Like, that is every teacher in England, ultimately, their goal is to entertain an Ofsted inspector, even though he's not in the room. And it's just relentless. So marking is crazy in here. And it's a lot too. So I had 14 classes, 30 kids in each class, about 420 kids. And I was expected to mark each of their books once every 3 weeks in that standard.
So you're basically supposed to take the student's notebook and do all these like annotations. And so when the Ofsted officers come in, do they just pick a random kid's notebook and check it? That's
Yeah.
insane. Wow.
Yeah.
And do teachers actually do that?
Oh yeah, we had like I've seen this in multiple schools where you kind of go and they've got these, like in the library, for instance, they'll have all the subjects showing their books, and they'll play, look how good our subject is. Look at these students' books, and you look and it's pretty. It genuinely is pretty. It's got the students' notes, and in green it's got like the corrections, and in purple pen it's underlining all of this. The color coordination is for Ofsted. It's because they're telling Ofsted all our marking is in red, all our spelling is in green. So Ofsted, oh, I can see that. Looks really good. But you kind of show these ones. And I remember one time you kind of see, I was interested in learning French. And I saw the French books and they were wonderful. So I told the French teacher, hey, how much French do these kids actually know? And the French teacher was like, they know nothing. They can say bonjour, they can say je m'appelle, but that's about it. So she told me the kids don't speak any French, but their books look really pretty, and that's all that matters. Like, so long as it's pretty. Like, I'll give you one example, which you'll appreciate. You know those teaching moments when you realize that a student or the class doesn't get something? It feels good to know that you can step in and provide that explanation. I had that feeling in Australia, New Zealand, and Abu Dhabi. But in England, I had to stop myself from doing that. Because if the kids didn't understand it, it doesn't matter. It's in their books. So I'd have to move on. So Ofsted's basically stranglehold on schools is ruining education and the quality of education in England.
Wow, that is shocking and kind of new to me. And so I'm wondering, with the kids' behavior being so terrible, have they just kind of made a peace treaty with teachers saying that if we just copy this stuff off the board, the teacher will leave us alone? Or do you have kids refusing to even write down notes? Because I feel like in America, the kids like wouldn't even write the notes. Like it was that bad over here.
Oh yeah, they would outright refuse. So obviously, if they don't do the notes, I get told off for not doing the marking. So it's like a toxic symbiotic relationship. But these kids, they just refuse. Like I've had kids cry, put their heads on the floor. They refuse and have meltdowns just to stop. And even some kids do this really irritating thing where they'll just snap their pens or throw their pens out the window or make their pens explode. Or I'm not making this up. I've once had kids bang their heads on desks just to create headaches so they can say they have a headache and can't do the work. And I've never seen anything like it.
And so for your administrators, because I'm assuming Ofsted is separate than the school administration, do the administrators, like principals or headmasters, I'm not sure what they're called in England, do they kind of reinforce what Ofsted is complaining about? So would they come in and look at your notes before Ofsted comes in and kind of harass you, or how does that work?
So they're called head teachers. That's like the principal thing. But absolutely, I've had more feedback and observations in England, in one term in England, than like 5 years outside of England. Like I used to get maybe 3 or 4 observations and just like random, that were unannounced. They just walk in and start, they don't make eye contact with you. They just walk in, open the books and they start reviewing it. And then they send you a passive aggressive email saying like the spelling, well, I saw a spelling mistake that wasn't corrected or something like that. And all that again was just out of pure fear. Because in England, if you work as a teacher, you really get the idea quite quickly. They do not trust you at all. They are so terrified of Ofsted and they don't trust the teachers at all. So they constantly have to ram that fear to police these guidelines. And you get that all the time. I mean, in 1 week, one time I had 6 observations in 1 week. And it was just this and they like, there's this thing I mentioned in my first series in episode 1, where I talk about how it took 6 months before my teaching was ever mentioned. It's always like the books. And then one was like, oh, by the way, it's like you're teaching that thing you think you're supposed to be doing here. That there's something you can do here. So it's all about the books and all to please Ofsted.
That is crazy. That actually does sound worse than here in America. It's bad, but that is on another level. And so I'm kind of wondering, do the students pick up on this and try to get teachers in trouble? Because I know, in America, we have observations, and I would feel like kids would know that the teacher's boss was in there and they would try to do weird things to get the teacher in trouble. So did you ever see anything like that? Or do you feel like the kids were just kind of oblivious and in their own world?
A bit oblivious, but thankfully, when like a head teacher or a member of the senior leadership that walks in, the kids are just like perfectly behaved most of the time, which is good. So in that bubble, they're great. They're wonderful.
That's interesting. And so I'm just kind of curious, having an experience where you felt like a successful teacher and then coming to England, how did that impact you overall? And did you ever find yourself putting the blame on yourself and trying like different methods to get through to the kids? Or what was that whole internal process like?
So when I first moved to England, it was a massive culture shock. A few things was a big culture shock, but one was a lot of the strategies that worked wonderfully outside of England just didn't work. Like the pause and stare. So in Australia and New Zealand, I'd pause my teaching, look at the kid. The kid would notice that the teaching is stopped, make eye contact. Oh, sorry, sir. And I'd continue teaching. Easy strategy. It's a staple. Worked in Abu Dhabi as well. In England, on the other hand, if you stop your lesson, stare at a kid, the kid will sometimes not even notice that the lesson stopped because they're chatting or something like that. But if they do make eye contact, they look at you and say, "What are you looking at me for? I didn't even do nothing." And then they get up and leave the classroom. And like, it's just, they have no resilience. Like even looking at a kid, not saying anything. I have had a few kids get up and leave. And then I get a complaint because like, oh, this student came to the SEN department crying, or the community section crying that, you stared at them and blamed them for something they didn't do and said that I didn't say anything. But it's the strategies in England didn't work. So obviously new strategies, right? So I started to change the way I did things and they just wouldn't work. Like I try many things. I try reward systems. They didn't care about the rewards. I tried punishment systems with like, you just writing their name on the board. And then if they get like a tick, they get 5 minutes detention, or if they get a second tick, 10 minutes detention. They just didn't show up. They just basically straight up ignored it. It was really difficult. And I felt like it doesn't resemble teaching in other countries. So the things that like, that's when I realized sometimes it's the kids, not the teacher.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. And how long did you end up teaching in England?
Yeah, 3 years.
Oh, 3 years.
Yeah.
And so did you ever see other teachers kind of pandering to the kids and buttering up and treating them like little princes and princesses? Or I just can't imagine in a situation like, what do you do to try to like get the kids on your side? How did you end up navigating that?
It was basically impossible to kind of get these kids to change, in a way. Then I've tried so many things, reward systems, like waiting for the kid to do one positive thing and then praising it, making a big job, say, hey, that felt good to be praised. I'll do more of nothing. Doesn't work. But a lot of the other teachers, thankfully, it's like when you see them like talking to somebody who's got a higher status in the school, they'll pander a bit verbally. But when it's just you and them, they will reveal that they are absolutely stressed out. They are just burnt with these kids, and all these strategies, they're just not working. Like I spoke to, for instance, we had an art teacher that was like close to where I was, and you spoke to this art teacher, and she's like thinking, I've tried everything, and these kids just can't follow the basic instructions. Same experience I had, and it's just kind of like a blanket. The teachers can't relate to these kids. You can't reason with them. So, for instance, I used to always tell my students, like I'd give them a choice. I'd say you can have a small punishment now, a small consequence now, or a big consequence later. Pretty reasonable and fair. And any kid would say, I'll take the small one now. But they would just be outraged and be on this whole tangent about like the consequence, the small versus. They just wouldn't want it. Zero consequences. Any consequence is violence towards me. That's kind of the approach that they had. And it was a struggle. Like you can't use strategies with these kids. It's very, very difficult. And you try the same approaches in other countries, works wonderful.
I can really relate to that. And that's ultimately why I stopped teaching, because it got to the point where I feel like there's only so much you can do. And at best, I felt like I was trying to like calm the ocean.
Yeah.
At all times. It's just like, if things can just be calm, and if somebody walks in and it looks like I'm teaching, but I knew at a heart level that there was so little that the kids were retaining just because they weren't trying. And so like, it's like sometimes they could regurgitate facts, and sometimes I could manage to do something that would get them interested for a few minutes, but I just knew long term, it just seemed like complete futility. And that's so demoralizing for a teacher that cares, because I think all of us sign up because we want to make a difference in kids' lives. And so it's just like when there's that lack of motivation and lack of caring, and then when you add defiance and attitude, it truly is an impossible mix. And so I'm kind of curious, at what point, was there a certain turning point in the year where you said, I'm just done with this? Was there an event that happened, or was it just like an accumulation over time?
I just want to comment one thing on what you were saying with the kids, just like being defiant and all that. There's an extra layer that has complicated everything in as far as being a teacher, and this also kind of contributed to me wanting to quit. So the SEN department, they issue passes. So did you have this in America, exit passes?
Not really. Mm-mm.
Oh, well, in England, what happens typically is the school notices a kid is constantly being removed from lessons for being very disruptive, very aggressive, and all that. So they notice. So they take the student and they send him to the SEN department. And then in the SEN department, they diagnose him with, rude and disrespectful disorder or something. And then they give the kid a pass. And the way the pass works is at any point in the lesson, if they feel feelings, they show the pass to the teacher and they can get out without any consequence. And that has absolutely disarmed every teacher from doing any consequences, because a kid will do something and in the same speed I'm telling it, all right, out, at the same speed they're reaching in, pulling out the pass. And so long as that's been displayed, if I say, no, you deserve a consequence, they'll just go to the SEN department and say, oh, sir didn't let me use my pass. And then I'll get an email from them and the parent, like, I realize you didn't let my student, my son or daughter have a pass. That's negligent behavior. They have need. And that's it. You basically, your hands are absolutely tied. You realize there's no point. I mean, I'm not I thought I was a teacher in England. I'm not. My main objective is to make Ofsted happy. That's number one. Number two, I can't do anything about behavior at all. And there's one thing about behavior which Ofsted is a huge contributor to. So Ofsted had this guideline that said that any school that excludes a student is disqualified from being outstanding, which is the top rating that every school wants. So obviously that means that schools are never going to exclude a kid. So last year I had a student that went on this racist rant towards me. He basically made fun of my background, he made fun of my upbringing in front of the whole class, and the whole class was laughing, ha ha ha, so that kid saying this to say ha 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 ha. In my mind I'm thinking, if there was ever a line, that kid just crossed it. This year he's the head boy. They didn't exclude him, because if they did, Ofsted would notice, oh, you excluded a kid, you can't be outstanding. And then it's just completely disarmed. I'm thinking, what on earth is going on with these schools? Like, I can't punish bad behavior and I can't even teach my subject, and I'm apparently a teacher. What
does it mean to exclude? Is that kind of like in America where we suspend a kid or put them in like in-school suspension, or what does that mean?
I think it's suspend in America.
Oh. So basically, like, no matter what a kid does, if the school gives them that consequence, they automatically are dropped from outstanding to the lower level?
Yeah, so you're disqualified. You can't reach outstanding. Like in my series, that series about like teaching in England, The Warning Bell, episode 2, part 4, I give examples of how weak schools are. And one of them, there was a head teacher discussing about like, oh, did this kid actually really mean to burn down our school? Because he was lighting things. I was like, did he mean to do that? No, I don't think he did. He wanted to burn the school down. Yeah, me neither. So let's give him just like a 5-day suspension. And that's it. Like, you can't be strict on behavior because let's just do this. The real reason is, of course, Ofsted, but that's what they say.
That is so crazy. Like, I feel mad on your behalf and on all the teachers in England's behalf. Like, I thought it was bad here, but I feel like that's like the final frontier of where we're going, because everybody is so afraid of like discipline and consequences. And it's just so bizarre. And I mean, our situation is kind of similar because there's been legislation here that has essentially said, they want to lower suspension rates. They want to make sure everybody's passing on to the next grade. A lot of motions have been made even to get rid of giving students a 0. That's what we're supposed to put previously in the yearbook when a student turns in nothing. And now they're saying, oh, you can't, even if they do nothing, you still have to give them half their grade, which would be a 50. Like, we're having a lot of this happen, because of legislation. And so, but it sounds like what you guys are experiencing, like that's the next level of what we're experiencing. And we have a lot of similar stuff when it comes to special education. If a student has a diagnosis of like ADHD or oppositional defiant disorder, we have something called like a 504 plan that's legally binding and parents can sue over it. And so I've had a lot of similar situations where like kids were throwing desks, fighting, screaming, ripping up bulletin boards, like yelling profanities, but because they got some kind of diagnosis, they're like, well, we can't really do anything about it. And so it's just so crazy. And so do you feel like in England, is it common knowledge of how bad things have gotten? Or do you think people are just kind of like, ostrich with the head in the sand situation?
So I like to talk about this subject because it's like a trauma to me. I always have to tell people about, like teaching in English. It's just ridiculous. You can't believe how bad it is. And then when I start talking about it and giving examples and showing the kid, like showing parents and just even like, especially the elderly have the most like exaggerated reaction. And for them, they go, I almost hear this every time. I knew it was bad, but not that bad. So they know it's bad, but once you hear just the level of disrespect, the level of violence, dishonesty, the level of the way the schools are run. It's just a shock to them. And, you know, it's unbelievable. Like I tell, my wife is English, and I tell her, and she's like, it doesn't resemble when I was in school. So it's whatever's happened, it's just a tragic and drastic change. And just a point on the SEN here is, after they give the passes and the students are being coached to show these passes so they can avoid being in trouble, the SEN department like to do assemblies celebrating that strategies are working because the number of kids removed from lessons is going down. They never mention that they're telling these kids to use it so they get off the strategy. Now, why are they doing this? I can't prove this, but I believe that it's because there must be some kind of tally, and Ofsted looks at the tally of students removed from lessons. And if that number is high, they get a lower grading. So they're doing that, again, to appease Ofsted.
Yeah, it's very similar here to a few years back when I was still teaching, our superintendent, and that's kind of like the guy that's over a network of all the schools in a district. He was basically bragging about how their graduation rate is excellent, how suspensions have gone down, how all of these consequences have gone down. But the elephant in the room is because we're not allowed to send kids out, we get in trouble, you know, essentially if we send a kid to the principal's office, or, you know, even if we do anything that's considered to be too negative. And so it's just so amazing how it's the same idea. It's not that students are getting better. It's not that grades are getting better. It's just that standards are being lowered. We're not allowed to give consequences. And really the teacher and the students that are doing the right things are the ones that are suffering in this situation. And I hope at some point there's a public outcry about this. But I think the hardest thing is kind of like you witnessed, so many parents are so stuck on defending their kids or wanting to believe that, you know, their kid is irreparably broken and that's the excuse for why they're acting like that. And so that is just really, really shocking.
There is an example in episode 1 of my series about one school called the Abbey School. In my video series, I'll give the exact numbers and sources. So I'm kind of, if I might be wrong by a number or two here. But basically, the Abbey School, when they started, they basically got no A stars. So none of the kids were getting the top marks. But now the school, it's like a quarter of them or so are getting A stars. Huge improvement. You'd think Ofsted would see this and be like, that's wonderful, good job, outstanding. Ofsted gave them the lowest rating because they were too harsh on discipline, and they said that the students felt that was oppressive. So it's like you can't win. You can't win.
What are some of the reasons you think this is happening? Because I think it's interesting, you know, that your wife noticed that when she went to school, it wasn't that bad. And I've noticed, you know, I graduated high school in 2005 and it wasn't that bad. What do you think that has changed, like, you know, across the seas, that's making these kids so out of control?
Well, I think a huge part of this is parents and the approach on consequences. From what I've seen in England, that kids are basically being grown up into an environment with no consequences. And now we're shocked that they're acting as if there's no consequences. So kids get away with anything. The parents are not harsh on behavior. They think that's harsh. They think being harsh on behavior is harsh. The gentle parenting is destroying these kids. Like these kids they have too much power. They've got too much influence. So no discipline at all. There's no discipline. There's no structure. Good or bad is a subjective feeling based on what you want. Does it benefit you? Yes, it's good. Even if it disturbs like 100 people, it doesn't matter. You are happy. So there's the lack of discipline, the lack of instruction, and just gentle parenting is a huge part of it, the gentle parenting part. And again, schools are incredibly weak on behavior. Actually, in my episode 2, part 4, I use you as a reference for gentle parenting. So
Nice.
Yeah.
Now I'm curious, in the other countries, it's like, which came first, the chicken or the egg? Was there harsh discipline for kids that acted up, or did the kids not act up so there wasn't a need for like harsh consequences?
In New Zealand, the kids were perfect. I mean, literally, these kids were the best behaved I've ever seen. They used to line up and say thank you for a lesson. I mean,
Wow.
they're wonderful, right? In Abu Dhabi, because a lot of them were foreign, like Arab parents, and like they would discipline their kids a bit too harshly, but the kids were terrified of basically getting a phone call home because they knew there was a real consequence waiting for them. In Australia, I didn't really see much behavior problems in terms of like a character. So in England, I would say their character has some issues where that's just a rude person, where you can be nice and considerate and account for all of their shortcomings and all that. Like, oh, I understand you had a flu and you must feel pretty. They're still rude and horrible to you. So that one, it's like, it's just ingrained that they just are horrible and mean. In Australia, I wouldn't really experience that. I would experience maybe some situation is directly causing this student to feel, a little angry. And once that is resolved, they're back to being friendly again. Whereas in England, it was like there's a switch, nasty, and it's always on. So,
I can relate. And so you taught like high schoolers, or I don't know what it's called on your end. So here we have like ninth grade through 12th grade is high school. And so have you talked to any teachers that taught younger kids and felt like they behaved better, or are these issues across the board in terms of ages?
From who I've spoken to myself, I have basically always got it's better in primary school. The kids are friendly and it's lovely and they love their jobs. But in making my series, I've found sources that show that 97%. So they had this documentary where they kind of followed schools around and they wanted to say, like, what's behavior like? And when they survey these teachers, they find 97% of the primary school teachers report violent behavior. Wow. So thankfully, the people that I've spoken to, they've had good experiences, but that is the exception. The majority is the negative. It does seem that way.
Wow. Yeah, and I've talked to a lot of teachers that are, working with much younger students, and they're seeing the same things, kids throwing chairs, kids cursing, kids being super inappropriate. And so just in general, I'm kind of wondering, what are some things that you wish the public knew about teaching in general? And if there's anything specific to England, like what do you wish people understood about what's going on?
Don't teach in England is the main one. Honestly, worst experience of my life. Outside of England, I was never disrespected. I was the teacher. I am the authority figure in this classroom. Here are my rules. Here's how things work. That's how it was outside. Here, the complete opposite. I want people to know just how bad it is here. So I feel there is no effective warning about what teaching in England is actually like. Like you said earlier at the beginning, everyone, including myself, before I came to England, I was like, wow, everyone's going to be like, oh, good morning. How's all this tea and crumpets, dear lad? That's what I expected. Everyone's going to be very fancy and very diplomatic and gentlemen and gentlewomen. It's the opposite here. And had I known how bad it is, I would never have been this badly disrespected, where I've had my things stolen and destroyed, where people have made fun of my background, the way I look, all that, like, it's horrible behavior. That warning isn't there. I feel that, for instance, your YouTube channel, that is a very effective warning about what teaching in America was like. I cast a wide net, but because of the information you've put out there, I would steer away from America. But that isn't there for England. So I was thinking, I need to warn people. I felt like it was like a desperate need. Like, I have to warn the international community what teaching in England is like. So I spent about 7 months to write a big script, 42,000 words, about over 250 sources, basically putting together all of my thoughts and making a warning. This is what it's like in England. You need to avoid it. It's not worth it. Don't do this to yourself. And that series it's 10 parts, so it's 4 episodes, 10 parts. So the first 3 are first 3 episodes, are challenges that you would expect as a teacher. And the final episode is, how would I solve the problem? Because if I just rant at them, I'm just whining. I had to provide some constructive feedback. So here's my conclusion. And at least one person has commented saying they were thinking about moving to England and teaching, and now they're not. So it is kind of working in that sense. But I really wish people knew just how bad it is and how desperately needed discipline is. You can't be weak on your kids and expect the country to flourish. You have to discipline the next generation, because look how bad it is.
Wow. And I'm curious, do you think that there's hope for England's school, or do you think because of just the cultural issues and the lack of respect that it might be a little too far gone at this point?
I hope and pray that England improves. I really do. I mean, again, as I said, my wife is English, her family's English, a lot of my friends are English. It's a shame to see what happened to this country. But from what I've seen, I can't imagine it being improved. I like to think of El Salvador, because El Salvador was the highest murder rate in the world. And then Bukele comes along, and in a couple of years, it's the safest country in the Western Hemisphere. So it's massive turnaround. I hope some massive change like that can happen in England. But from what I've seen, I would be extremely surprised, and I would bet it's probably never going to improve. It's just going to get worse and worse and worse and worse, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's honestly my concern for America too, because a lot of people ask me, like, why don't you have more positive solutions? But I think beliefs dictate actions. And so when people believe that it's oppressive to give people consequences and discipline them, then they're going to constantly push back on anything that looks like accountability. And it sounds like that's happening in Western world nations, where any kind of consequences and cause and effect, if you even mention it or talk about it, people are like, you're so mean. How could you say that? And so in a lot of the helping professions like teaching, there is just such a pressure to be silent and to pretend like everything's okay, or to even, have self-deception where you think, oh, the kids are great, everything's great, I can just be better. And so
Oh,
I'm just
absolutely.
really thankful for you, warning people and telling the truth about what it's like in England, because I think a lot of people would be really, really surprised to find that out.
Yeah. I believe in a message. I believe that if you have something you believe in, you can put a message out there. And I want people to watch this. I want them to be skeptical, because that would mean that they kind of like investigate, and that investigation would lead them to, what I've found to be true. So I've introduced this really cool reference system I use in the video. So every time I reference a source, there'll be a number in the corner, and then you basically relay that number with the source. So every one of my sources, over 200, are all in the description of these videos. So I want people thinking about moving to England to make an informed decision. So I'm making that as easy as possible, because it is the most traumatizing experience I have ever had. And I would rather jump off a cliff and get eaten by sharks than teach one more lesson in English.
That's powerful. So this has been so interesting so far. I'm just kind of curious, are you happier now that you're outside of the classroom?
I was unaware that humans could experience that level of joy. I felt like I lost 1,000 pounds. I mean, it was the most amazing. It was the 15th of December, 2023. And like, I flew from school to home. Like, it was unbelievable. I'm so much happier now. Haven't been disrespected once since leaving. Haven't had to deal with unnecessary tasks. It was incredible. And yeah, it's the best feeling I've ever had, ever.
Good. I'm so happy to hear that. Do you
Yeah.
foresee yourself trying to teach in any other countries at any time, or are you
Yeah.
just hanging up your chalk?
It's a passion, like once you get the teaching bug, it's just something ingrained inside you. And I would like to return to a classroom. I do enjoy it. It's very, very rewarding to me. I've got a lot of benefits out of it. I find it very fruitful. And my mum was a teacher. She was a teacher in Egypt, and it's like in the family as well. So I would travel and move to another country. I just would never, ever in a billion years teach in England again.
Very understandable. Well, this has been super enlightening and fun. And thank you for your honesty. Where can people find you if they want to hear more about your journey?
So it's the YouTube channel is Mr. Rufaeel. It's the project I'm referring to is 10 parts, 4 episodes, and it's in a playlist. And you can find everything you need to know about teaching in England there, and some cool geography clips, and cats. If you like cats, I've got tons of cats things. So, yeah.
Awesome. Yes, I have 2 cats and 2 rabbits, so we love the cats. Well, this has been so good. Thank you so much. I'll make sure to have your information linked in the description. And audience, thank you so much for watching. Make sure to visit his video series. It's been really good so far. And if you'd like to interview with me, feel free to email me at teachertherapytrish@gmail.com. And we'll see you guys next time. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Bye for now, everybody.
Bye-bye.